Well, good afternoon to everyone who's able to join us today. We're so grateful that you're able to spend an hour of your time with us. We know that these are definitely strange and difficult times for congregations across the country, but we are really dedicated to we're dedicated and focused on serving you and hearing your stories about what you've been doing in your communities. So thank you again for being with us today. My name is Krista Satirhos, and I'm the director of the National Fund for Sacred Places at Partners here. You'll notice that there's a chat box below at the bottom of your screen. So that chat box is where we invite you to share your questions, your thoughts, or comments throughout this presentation. And we'll also be referring to the chat box at the end of our session today when we have set aside about 15 minutes for questions and answers. A recording of this webinar will also be uploaded to our National Fund website, and we'll be sending out a copy of this PowerPoint to all attendees, along with any questions that we may not get to at the end of the session. So expect that in about a week or so after today's presentation. We want to make sure that you have all the information that you need to complete your letter of intent, which is due on March 15th. So today we have with us President and Founder of Partners, Bob Yeager, our Executive VP, Gianfranco Grande, Grants and Programs Manager, Allison King, and Senior Program Manager, Rachel Hildebrandt. Bob, do you want to say any quick comments?
Well, just thank you, Krista. Just welcome. We're thrilled that over 300 folks have expressed an interest in joining us today and learning more about the fund and the letter of intent process. And this is our first webinar introducing folks to the letter of intent process. So we're really thrilled that you're joining us today. Thank you.
Gianfranco, did you want to say anything real quick?
Yes, thank you, Krista. I want to echo Bob's comments. First of all, it's a great pleasure for us to have you. And we are sure that you will find this webinar useful. And we are excited about this new round that's starting today. In a sense, it started just a few days ago. We wish you luck and try to make the best of this webinar. But also, if you have other questions later on, there are always ways for you to reach us, and we'll be able to help you. So welcome, everybody.
Absolutely. If you do have any additional questions after this webinar that aren't addressed through our distribution of our notes, you can email myself or Allison. All of our information is at the end of this PowerPoint as well. So if you have any other questions, definitely feel free to give us an email. Okay, so today we're going to be giving a brief overview of the National Fund for Sacred Places and walk you through the application process in Foundant, which is our grant interface. We're going to address some frequently asked questions regarding eligibility criteria, fundraising component of our grant, and how we at Partners for Sacred Places evaluates each submission that comes in. So founded in 1989, Partners for Sacred Places is the only non-sectarian nonprofit organization dedicated to sound stewardship and active community use of older sacred places across America. We provide capital campaign training and fundraising strategies, along with technical assistance, grants to congregations and other local organizations across the United States via the National Fund program. But we also have a number of exciting programs ranging from arts and sacred places to playing and preserving. We additionally provide customized regional programs where we provide congregational trainings, consultings, and convenings. But today's webinar is only focused on the National Fund for Sacred Places. So the National Fund is a program of Partners for Sacred Places in collaboration with the National Trust for Historic Preservation. It's graciously funded by the Lilly Endowment Incorporated, a private philanthropic foundation supporting the cause of religion, education, and community development. Here is your National Fund team. Partners will be your main point of contact for your letters of intent, but the resources of both Partners and the National Trust are available to you as you need. So we're very pleased to have Jennifer Sandy from the National Trust with us here today. Jennifer, would you like to introduce yourself and share a bit of the role the National Trust plays in the National Fund process?
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here today and see so much interest in this wonderful program. For those who may not be familiar with the National Trust for Historic Places, We're a privately funded nonprofit organization. We've been around for 70 years. And our mission is to save America's historic sites, tell the full American story, build stronger communities, and invest in preservation's future. And this program is really a key component of really all of those areas of focus for us at the National Trust. We work in very close collaboration with Partners for Sacred Places on the National Fund program. You can see my colleagues here on the screen who also work on the program with me, including Olivia Terraconi, who is our preservation architect, and Diana and Nikki, who are on our grant staff. And so working, as I said, with partners, as you're accepted into the program, we work very closely with congregations to help them develop their architectural planning and provide preservation expertise, connections to preservation networks and resources and support. So we're just really delighted to be part of this program and look forward to working with many of you hopefully this year. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. So a quick program introduction. As previously mentioned, the National Fund is a grant-making program funded by the Lilly Endowment. It is the first and only grant of its kind, and it was originally created in 2016. So there have been 2 phases so far. Phase 1 took place between 2016 and 2019, in which we funded 52 congregations with capital projects that exceeded the congregation's typical donor base and membership. We're currently in phase 2 of the program, which will take place between 2020 and 2023, and we're looking forward to assisting many more congregations. So the National Fund provides grants for the planning and execution of urban capital campaigns at historic churches that are valued for their cultural importance, as well as their role in providing human service, strengthening communities, and revitalizing neighborhoods, as well as providing training, capacity building, and technical assistance to assure that grant-funded projects are successfully planned and implemented. Partners for Sacred Places knows that faith communities are more than just their historic buildings. Historic houses of worship provide invaluable resources to their communities in recognition of these many values. The National Trust evaluates applicants from a bunch of different angles. We look at sites' historic significance as well as current community engagement, project scope and need, fundraising campaign readiness, and healthy congregations. We're going to delve deeper into these 5 criteria later on in this webinar. So Partners for Sacred Places is informed and guided by an advisory committee, which is made up of faith leaders, preservation professionals, nonprofit leaders, academics, and grant managers. The advisory committee supports partners and trust staff in reviewing all of the program applications and evaluating projects based on those 5 criteria that I just mentioned. You'll get a copy of these slides at, about a week after this webinar, in which you can click on the link below and see who is on our advisory committee, or if you want to do some research before then, the advisory committee is also listed on our National Fund website. So now I'd like to pass the teaching over to Allison King, who's our grants and program manager here at Partners for Sacred Places, who's going to speak a little about technical assistance and capital campaigns. Allison, take it away.
Thanks, Krista. So as we've mentioned, the National Fund is more than just a grant program. We provide training and technical assistance above and beyond the monetary support we offer with the planning grants and the capital grants. In this portion of the presentation, I'll provide more details about what congregations can expect to receive should they be awarded entry into the National Fund program. The typical program timeline is between 18 and 24 months. Upon program entry, we hit the ground running with our fall National Fund training session. In the past years, this has been a 3-day intensive workshop, but due to COVID, we've had to transition into an online format this year. We're not sure if this year's training will be online or in person, but we plan to have more information available to folks who are invited to complete a full application. Planning grants are made available to congregations as soon as they're entered into the program, but the planning grants must be spent by September of 2022 to ensure that congregations make the most of this resource early on in their project planning process. Once the training has been delivered, we work with each congregation to craft a specialized technical assistance agreement, which cements which pieces of support each congregation will receive from our staff. Technical assistance services must be utilized within the first full calendar year of entry into the program, so by December of 2022. The National Fund is a little different than other grant programs in that we do not award the grant upon entry into the program. congregations must meet 2 benchmarks that demonstrate that they've both invested in raising funds, so they must have a quarter of the matching funds raised, and they have to develop permit-ready documents that describe the entire scope of their national fund project. I'll go into more detail about what the capital grant submission process looks like, but once our team has reviewed the materials and approved the capital grant submission, the first half of the award is dispersed to the congregation to begin work on their capital fund project. Once the work is completed, we will issue a final report and schedule a final site visit and release the final half of the grant award to the congregation. Each participating congregation will be asked to select 2 to 3 representatives to attend the National Fund training session. The National Fund training covers topics such as community-wide fundraising, capital campaigns, a brief intro to capital project planning, starting or working with friends groups, and much more. In past years, as I've mentioned, we've hosted this training in person, but due to COVID-19, we've transitioned online, and in the past 3 months, we've held 5 different sessions. If the training is in person this year, $2,000 will be made available to each congregation to help defray the travel costs to the 2 to 3 representatives that they've chosen to participate in the National Fund training. Every congregation that is accepted into the National Fund for Sacred Places will receive a package of technical assistance that is rooted in partners' experience and is tailored to each congregation's project needs. All congregations participating in the National Fund will receive training with their group cohort, a site visit from National Fund staff. They are eligible for the planning grants of up to $5,000, and they are offered one of the services listed on this slide. Technical support services can include case statement review. We do provide some instruction in the group training about the development of case statements, but some congregations may want additional assistance to ensure that their case statement is setting the right tone and speaking to the correct audience and positioning them in a way to make the most of this opportunity. So that's one option available for technical assistance. Another is the commissioning of an economic halo effect study. These tools are used to raise the profile of a congregation, and they help communicate the economic impact of a congregation to the broader community to invite folks to participate in their mission and their project. We also have communication support from our staff, and up to 5 hours of their time is available for folks who are interested in this piece of technical assistance. Help could be ranging from reviewing press releases, talking through media rollout strategies, and much more. Project planning assistance is available with Olivia Terraconi, who's the preservation architect with the National Trust. She can help you write requests for proposals, vet preservation professionals, or review contracts and proposals that you may receive for your project pieces. The other piece of technical assistance that may be applicable to your congregation's needs is capital campaign support provided by Partners Senior Vice President Gianfranco Grande, who you've already met. He served in this role since the inception of the fund and provides fantastic advice and feedback for those who need an ear to bounce ideas off in the middle of their capital campaign. So these are the technical assistance services. And again, a selection of one of these listed is available to each congregation, and that will be hammered out after the training and the orientation session. Once folks are entered into the program, a planning grant of $5,000 is available to them to help defray the costs of project planning, campaign expenses, marketing materials development, and any other type of service that could be used to help plan your capital project. We encourage awardees to use these grants creatively and early on in their process within the first 6 to 8 months of the program. These planning grants do not have to be matched, but again, they must be used by September of 2022 to make sure that congregations use them correctly early on in their process. So now to the meat and potatoes, the capital grant submission requirements. So as I've mentioned, the National Fund is a little different than other grant programs. The grant award is not dispersed from the outset, but once each congregation has met 2 benchmarks. They must raise a quarter of the matching funds to get a sense of what their overall project budget will be, and they must develop permit-ready documents that describe the entire scope of work for the National Fund project. I'm going to dive into these benchmarks a little bit in more detail, but I did want to note that work cannot begin on the National Fund scope of work until our team has approved the capital grant submission documentation. So while fundraising begins the moment that folks enter into the program, the capital work cannot begin until we've seen a quarter of the funds documented, pledged, or in hand, and permit-ready documents that describe the entire scope of work. And once we review these two benchmarks in the capital grant submission process, then the work can begin on the National Fund project. A little bit more about matching funds. Our Matching Fund Challenge is designed to incentivize congregations to expand their network of stakeholders and donors to build sustainable connections that can continue to provide congregations with the tools that they need to sustain their communities well into the future. Each congregation must match our grant dollars with new money raised after they awarded entry into the program. This means that matching funds raised prior to the grant award announcement in October of 2021 do not count as matching funds. For grants of $50,000 to $100,000, congregations are responsible for matching dollar for dollar what we award. For larger grants of $100,000 up to the full $250,000, congregations must raise twice as much as we give, or a 2-to-1 match. Eligible matching funds come in many different forms. They can be donations from individuals or congregation members. They can be grants from foundations or corporations or government. Stock, real estate, or property sale also counts. So do the monies profited from events or bequests that have matured in the granting period, again, after program entry, but before the project is completed. We do accept in-kind materials and services donated to projects as a portion of the matching funds, but in-kind services and donations cannot exceed 20% of the required matching fund total. The value of the donated services and materials will be based on the fair market value. And that's a longer conversation should folks wish to use in-kind donations as a part of their match. And when folks are getting up to the capital grant submission stage, we review all of this information with them. Eligible projects for the National Fund can include envelope sealing, roof repairs, windows, doors, towers, domes, mechanical systems, HVACs, heaters, boilers, wiring, life safety upgrades, fire code upgrades, fire suppression systems, and interior changes that keep spaces utilized for outreach functions, be it a space reconfiguration or ADA accessibility projects that open up what the possibilities are for spaces. Ineligible projects include new additions, except for the cases of accessibility, such as building a new ramp or reconfiguring a restroom. We do not fund religious iconography restoration, so altar painting, icons, things of that nature. We don't support demolition with this program funds. Landscaping, and that does include cemeteries, pipe organ repairs, and interior furniture are all ineligible costs for the National Fund. To document the work, as I mentioned, we need permit-ready documents. And what we mean by that are bid or construction documents, which could include architectural, structural, mechanical, electrical, any sort of drawings that would go to describe the scope of work that you would need to submit to the city in order to get a permit for the work. We do not accept schematic design drawings, building conditions assessments, architectural feasibility studies, or other planning documents for the capital grant submission stage. We understand that every project is a little different and the exact set of documents will vary project to project, which is why it's critical that you will consult with our preservation architect, Olivia Terraconi, to determine what exactly we will need in terms of documentation for your capital grant submission. We don't want folks to create excess documentation specifically for our program, which is why we try to align our documentation requirements with what your local authority would require to receive a permit for the work. To kind of summarize, the typical program timeline, as I mentioned, takes between 18 to 24 months. From program entry to the training, to utilizing the planning grant, technical assistance, and all the way up to the capital grant process when you're just about to start the work, and all the way to the end when the project is completed and we're able to complete the final visit. We're so excited to share this program with you and dive into more of what that application process might be for folks who are interested in applying. I'll turn it back over to you, Krista. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the great information. So the fund, as we stated earlier, provides grants for urgent capital projects and training in fundraising and your role in strengthening communities and revitalizing your neighborhoods. So again, here's our 2021 application timeline. Today, we're mostly focusing on the letter of intent, which again is due March 15th. So the way that our program works is once the National Fund team reviews all the applications, we'll select a small number of congregations that will be invited to apply to the fund. I want to reiterate that the letter of intent and the application are two separate deadlines, but we will alert the congregations of the status of their letter of intent by May. And if your congregation is encouraged to apply, those applications will be due by July 14th. So remember, we touched on the 5 criteria earlier. So here they are again. These 5 criteria will be used to evaluate your application. And those are national and regional significance, community engagement, project scope and need, fundraising campaign readiness, and healthy congregations. So when I say national and regional significance, I want to clarify that your building does not have to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places, but it does need to have a unique national architectural, historical, or cultural significance, or have a compelling history that assesses how it shaped American religion and culture in your area. So the significance of your sacred place may come from its architecture, its cultural values, a historical event, broader patterns in history in your community. You do not need to provide official certification that your building is historic. And the definition of historic, I saw a couple people ask in the chat box while Allison was giving her presentation, is roughly 50 years. But there is, we do take a look at everything that accompanies it, including culturally, architecturally, all that. So really, we want to know the history, who designed it, the style of the building, did the congregation to respond to any key events in local or national history? How is your building complex or building served as a symbol of your community or heritage? Questions like these are really important when writing your letter of intent because it gives us the foundation of who you are. So for community engagement, describe to partners how your congregation is interested in providing outreach ministries that benefit both members and non-members of your congregation. So ideal candidates to the National Fund are not just culturally or historically significant architecturally, but are actively engaged with their community through collaborative partnerships that open up doors and share as much space as possible. So this could look like sharing your space with another congregation or operating a food pantry during the weekdays. For project scope and need, we look at your project scope and how large that capital campaign will be for your congregation. So we want to know the work that you're going to be completing. It should be noted that all projects must respect the historic character and materials of the building and adhere to the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. So what those are, the standards are 4 distinct approaches to the treatment of historic properties: preservation, rehabilitation, restoration, and reconstruction. And they each have guidelines that accompany each, but we're only focused on guidelines for rehabilitation for the National Fund. And the intent of the standards for rehabilitation is to assist long-term preservation of a property's significance through the preservation of historic materials and features. So the rehabilitation standards are applied when repair and replacement of deteriorated features are necessary, or when alterations or additions to the property are planned for new or continued use. Some of these standards include, the property shall be used for historic purposes or placed in a new use that requires minimal change to the defining characteristics. Each property shall be recognized as a physical record of its time, place, and use. Changes to your building happen over time, and adding additional features or architectural elements from other buildings is a no-go. But because most properties change over time, those changes have acquired historic significance as well. So let's say your building is from 1858, but there was an addition in 1901. That is part of the characteristic of your building now. So they have acquired historic significance in their own right. There are 10 or 11 of these rehabilitation standards, which when we send this out, we'll have a link to those guidelines for those rehabilitation standards as well, so you can delve a little deeper into those. So for fundraising and campaign readiness, like we said earlier, a large part of the national fund process is requires matching funds. So we look at your congregation's fundraising campaign readiness for your large capital campaign. Allison spoke to it briefly before, but remember, if you're applying for a grant between $50,000 to $100,000, and there's a 1-to-1 match requirement, and if you're applying for a grant between $100,001 and $250,000, there are a 2-to-1 match requirement. So we look at your congregation's ability to meet those monetary benchmarks. It's not a requirement that your congregation have experience with capital campaigns, but it is important that we see a fundraising plan outlining how your congregation will raise this matching portion. It should be noted, though, again, that you cannot use funds obtained prior to your acceptance into the program. So if you're accepted to the National Fund program, any funds raised prior to October are ineligible. And last but not least, we look at healthy congregations. So one of the most effective and sustaining ways for sacred places to be meaningfully preserved is to ensure that they continue to house thriving congregations or faith communities. So what we're really looking for is a history of your congregation and congregations with measurable vitality for ministry and strong clergy and lay leadership. Here we want to know how long of a tenure has your senior clergy have, how's the congregation navigated trauma in the past, etc. So there are a couple questions in our LOI form that address this healthy congregation. And if you have any questions about that, you can email myself or Allison. Here is a picture of congregations and where they're located throughout the country that we have funded with the National Fund. And we have a keen interest in states that we haven't previously funded, such as North and South Dakota, Florida, Georgia, Utah, etc. But we look at everyone, and we're so happy to bring in as many as we can per year. So just a couple quick tips for writing your letter of intent before I hand it back over to Allison who's going to show you how to use the grant portal. Here are some tips. We really want to get to know who you are as a congregation. So tell us who you are, what you do, and what you need. So be as specific as possible and provide professional quality photos. A lot of us here at Partners are historic preservationists and we love historic images, but please don't send them in your letter of intent packages. We really want to see contemporary professional photographs that are well lit. Your application is going to be submitted online through the computer interface called Foundant, in which Allison will talk you through right now. Take it away, Allison.
Thanks, Krista. So as Krista mentioned, we do not accept print submissions. The location of the letter of intent can be found on our website, fundforsacredplaces.org, at the bottom of the How to Apply page. Now, once you click that link, it should take you to the Foundant landing page. I've included a link here so that you can directly get to the landing page. But this is what the login page looks like. You'll either enter your email address and password if you've already created an account. If not, you will create an account in Foundant. The Foundant kind of new account page will ask you information about, the congregation, the tax ID. You'll put in all of that information, but I want to be sure that whoever is creating the account is aware that they are the designated point person for this project in our official grants management system. So they will be responsible for all official communications from the National Fund, which will be issued through Foundant. And this is through not just the application process, but through the entire program. We can switch that person if need be, but make sure that when you're choosing the point person, that they're aware of these responsibilities and will be regularly checking the email that they use to create an account for notifications about their application status. Once you've created a Foundant account, it will take you to the main dashboard page. You won't see much on it at first, but I will point you to the Apply button that's next to the home icon on the upper left of your dashboard that says Apply. Once you have clicked that button, it will take you to the Apply page. Ignore any requests for access codes for the application. That's for the capital grant submission stage, not to be confused with the LOI, which is available on the application page. If you scroll down a little bit, you'll see a blue box that says Apply. I've had it highlighted with a yellow arrow at the bottom right. So once you click apply, it will take you to the letter of intent. Once you get to the letter of intent form, what I recommend doing is typing in something easy like your name and then scrolling to the bottom of the application. So once you have entered in any information into the application, be sure that you save your application so you can return to it. You'll see there's two buttons at the bottom of the application. One is blue and then one is gray. The gray one, kind of highlighted by the yellow arrow, is the save button. The button circled in green that's blue is the submit button. They're close, but very different. So make sure that you only press the submit button once you are ready. If you do hit the save button, assuming that it will take you more than one go to enter in all the information, it will ask you for a confirmation page so that you're aware that you're leaving things blank. Don't worry about it. Just come back to the letter of intent when you're ready. You'll see a blue button continue on the lower right-hand corner with, again, pointed out with a yellow arrow. So you'll hit continue, and that will take you back to your dashboard so that you can log out, or should you wish to resume, you can go to the active request tab, again, highlighted by a yellow arrow. And you'll see on the bottom right, circled in green, a link that says edit LOI. And that will return you to your unfinished letter of intent form so that you can resume writing your letter of intent. And again, when you're either done with the draft or you're ready to submit, save or submit is at the bottom of that letter of intent form. Another feature of the letter of intent form is the ability to add collaborators. At the top of the form on the left-hand side, there will be another blue button that says Add Collaborators. Once you click that button, a new menu of items will pop up. You will add the email address of the person you wish to add as a collaborator, and you can set the permissions for what you would like the collaborator to be able to do. Do you want them to look at it? Do you want them to edit? Or do you want them to be able to submit? You'll be able to send a little message along with your invitation to collaborate to give a little bit more explanation for whoever you're trying to rope into helping you. Again, when you're ready to submit, you'll go into the form, and at the bottom, circled in green, there's the blue button that will say Submit Application. And with that, I believe I will turn it back to Krista, and we can start by opening it up for questions.
Thanks very much. So thank you so much for coming to our webinar. We're going to go over a couple of questions that we've gotten in the chat box throughout. So let's start. Okay, so someone asked, how does the October 2021 benchmark work with stock sale and mature bequests? Allison, do you want to take this?
I'm actually going to pass this one to John Franco, who has the better language for this. John Franco, if you wouldn't mind.
Everything is matured after the date of admission into the program. So if your bequest was done before and is matured before the date, therefore it doesn't count. So keep in mind it's always the date of admission into the fund. And say the same things for the stocks. If you had stocks or somebody donated you stocks and you redeem it before, which means you transform it into cash before the date of admission into the fund, will not count. But if it happened after that, then will count.
Gianfranco and Allison, I might just add something about the reason for this. The reason we do this is we would really like any grant from the fund to be leverage for you to help you raise new funds from some new sources, whether it's members or grantors or some other source. And rather than relying on existing funds to really help you go out there and raise some new money. So that's the reason why we required that timing.
You're right. And the last things about this, we have seen that there are some congregation from past cohorts that are so smart in leveraging this grant. So please don't stop just to the grant itself, which is a good amount of money, of course, but there is another power of this program is what can leverage after. So that's really, really, really important.
Thank you. So another question that we've received a few times is, where can we find historic defined? So I said a little earlier that historic, if you're assessing a building for its historic value, roughly it's 50 years, but you can find a better definition of that on the National Register of Historic Places, and the National Park Service has a great website for that, where you can take a look at that as well. So someone else, I'm sorry.
Krista, I might add.
Absolutely.
We realize a lot of great sacred places are not yet listed on the National Register or any historic listing, so we try to be flexible. But our colleagues at the National Trust might add a word. Jennifer, how would you address that question of historic?
Sorry, I had to unmute there. Yeah, I mean, I think the flexibility is key here, just given that there are a lot of different ways that historic can be defined. And I think we're looking primarily at, you know, integrity of the building. You know, has it had many features that have been changed over time, or does it really retain a lot of those original features and true sense of place? Certainly having it listed or considered eligible for the National Register of Historic Places is helpful, but as everyone has stated, it's not required. So I think if you do have a more specific question related to historic eligibility for, you know, historic character, you should just reach out to any member of the team and we'd be glad to look at it specifically.
There is one thing, more things if I may add. I usually the questions at the beginning are always about historic you know, aspects of the building, as well as the fundraising pieces. Don't forget the community engagement. It is extremely important for Partners for Sacred Places, this concept of, and the National Trust, of course, you know, the concept of community engagement. And so don't undervalue that piece.
I see that George has asked a related question about what do we mean by leveraging? And so maybe I can add another word. The National Fund is really the only major source of major grants that's national for historic sacred places. So to participate in the fund it brings a lot of prestige to your project, and it may really enable you to go to a donor or to a local foundation to say, hey, you know, this is affirmation of our building's importance and the work we do in the community. So would you consider stepping forward to help us match this grant? So it can really get the attention of folks, even those who may have given before. You might go back and say, would you give again? Because here's our chance to really add to our fundraising potential and really complete this project.
In fact, there is one of the alumni of this program, a church in Chicago, as a matter of fact. They were so good in leveraging, which is what Bob has described, this grant, that from the 250,000, they were able to raise another about 1.2 million, because they kept talking about what great opportunity was. And, you know, this is a seal of approval in a sense. That's what we mean for leverage.
Great responses, everybody. Thank you very much for elaborating on that. We had another question, is that for communication strategy, would that cover social media support? Yes, it would cover social media support on top of a number of different communications aspects that you may need. So are permit ready documents due with the letter of intent? Allison, do you want to take this?
Sure. So the level of documentation we require for the application is a lot less than the permit than for the capital grant submission. What we're looking for in the letter of intent is to see that folks have taken a holistic approach to their building, either with a building conditions assessment or with you know, any type of investigation that they've already completed to figure out what are the immediate needs of their building and what are those priorities. When we get past and into the program is when we hit the ground running, again, with the development of documentation. And that's when we'll need to see permit ready documents ready for our review. But for the LOI and the application, we don't need to see permit ready documents. We just need to see that folks have taken a good look at their building and have noted all of the issues and not just gone to the most immediate, which does happen fairly frequently. Folks often say, we want help with the stained glass windows, but they've never gone up on the roof to see that there's probably a hole in the roof that's causing water to come down through the wall and cause problems with the stained glass. So we want to make sure that folks know what they're doing before they open up walls, because once you do, you can't put that back until you've abated the asbestos, you've addressed all of the other issues. So we just want to make sure that folks have a solid understanding of their buildings and are already starting to think about what projects they're going to prioritize for the National Fund scope of work. And once folks are into the program is when we look for those permit ready documents.
Thanks very much, Allison.
Sure.
So another question that we've been getting is, does the grant cycle occur each year? Yes, it does. So each grant cycle, there were 2 phases, but those phases are only separated by funding from our funder, the Lilly Endowment. So each grant cycle will occur each year. So the 2021 letter of intent is due March 15th, and the whole cycle will go through until October, when we alert congregations that have been asked to apply if they've been accepted into the program. And then you'll have another opportunity for the 2022 cohort as well. So this does occur on an annual basis.
Hey, Krista,
Yes?
Go ahead.
I see that there's been some questions about temples or synagogues qualifying.
Yes.
Maybe I can say a quick word about that. And
Please, that would be great.
Yeah, and maybe Jennifer, you want to say a word. So far, the fund has served 2 synagogues and 1 Buddhist temple. But the primary funder of the fund is mostly interested in Christian churches. But we want to make this as interfaith as we can. And in fact, we're working very hard to broaden the funding so we can include more non-Christian sacred places as well as churches. We have a limited ability at this point, but we're trying as hard as we can to really broaden and extend our reach to sacred places of all faith traditions. Jennifer or Gianfranco, would you add a word to that?
Oh, you said it, perfectly, Bob. It's this is a fund that was not for our intentions, but for our funder, specifically created for churches. Yet we were able to make a couple of exceptions, and we're trying the best that we can, but there is no insurance that we can do that.
We got another really good question that is going to be probably one that many of you ask. So question on our LOI is average weekly attendance. So how do congregations do that who have not been meeting in person because of COVID? Gianfranco or Bob, do you want to answer this or weigh in?
Sure, Bob, please jump in. I mean, obviously, COVID has been a problem for everybody. Try to be give us a number maybe before COVID. We know that it's very hard. It's been very hard this past year because services are held, online, and I don't know if there is the possibility to have information about how many people are attending, service on Sunday. But you might have the information prior to COVID.
Great, thanks very much. Are contractor estimates required for the LOI submittal? Allison?
No, again, the project documentation requirements for the LOI and the application are less stringent than the capital grant. We just need to see that folks have an understanding of their building, a sense of which projects they're going to prioritize, and any other information, be it investigation or proposals that they have on hand. We know that the documentation will take some time to develop once folks are figuring out what the funding is looking like, and then as the project takes shape.
Thank you. We got another great question. A congregation is planning a capital campaign with some items that we don't fund. How should they go about handling separating what we do fund and what we don't as a result of the entire project? Allison, do you want to take this?
Sure. So it's not uncommon that the National Fund is one piece of a much larger project. And indeed, the project elements on a whole do not necessarily all have to comply. Folks will stabilize a plaster ceiling, and then they'll be the ones to fund the pews, but that's not something that we'll fund. We also do not fund audio-visual equipment. So pieces like that may be incorporated as a larger project, but don't fall into the National Fund scope of work. We're happy to review a set of documents that describes the overall project and kind of be able to sort out what is and isn't ours, so you don't have to have anything created especially for us that documents the National Fund components. But that being said, if there are kind of larger pieces of the project that our group feels a little uncertain of, that may not work to your advantage. And I'll give the example. The congregation applied last year for roof repairs, stained glass windows, and an ADA ramp to their building, all of which qualify. Also among this project was the building of a large 3-story building that would kind of occupy the front courtyard space and really drastically alter the impression of that historic space. And our review team was not necessarily comfortable with that new addition and the placement and the overall project. But again, that's not to say, that all of the project components must comply. You can incorporate parts, like a pipe organ restoration along with, fire suppression systems. And the National Fund may only cover the fire suppression system, and you go on to raise more funds for your pipe organ. But again, if there are either large additions or huge pieces of demolition that are also involved with your project, that's something we want to know about and evaluate on a case-by-case basis.
And just one addition to what Allison beautifully expressed is that capital campaign tend to look at the bigger picture, and you might have segments of the project. So to fix the boiler is not a capital campaign, it's a project. And, so you have to keep in mind that kind of distinction.
Absolutely. So we got another question. Does repurposing of a church building for another ministry meet our criteria? Gianfranco or Bob, do you want to take a stab at this one?
I would say, we often work with congregations to rethink how they share their space and how they use their space. So it could be an old Sunday school wing, it could be the parish hall, it could be the dining room and kitchen. So if it's still owned and occupied by the congregation, and if this new purpose is really essential to your outreach and ministry, and you want to invest in it and restore it and renovate it, then that might qualify.
And if you have a strong case for that, that's really, really important. So it's not just aesthetic, we don't like our kitchen anymore, so.
Okay, there was a question about safety concerns, and will adding security, lighting, and church illumination qualify as part of a project? Allison?
Yes, in the case of security lighting, exterior lighting, electrical upgrades to, sanctuary chandeliers, those types of electrical upgrades do qualify. But again, once we start talking about audio-visual equipment and sound systems, those are things that we don't support with our grant funds. So with regards to electrical, think the nuts and bolts and not the sexy stuff. Which gives you an opportunity to reach out to folks who may more directly benefit from those things and who may not care or notice that they're no longer using knob and tube wiring and are actually using things that are up to code. So again, kind of with that eye towards project selection, think of which pieces are going to be really key and maybe are not the fluffier pieces, because we get folks applying, without roofs, all sorts of different things. So it's always a mixed bag, but we definitely, for security, for code upgrades, things like that, definitely yes, but the fluffier pieces, not so much.
And Allison, I might add, I think it's important to make the case that this kind of investment keeps your building usable, keeps it functioning. And without it, you're really handicapped. And furthermore, if you can say, hey, by investing in our systems, we can house important new outreach programs. And it may not be the sanctuary, it may be the parish hall. So if you can make a case that this will help us keep this building together and keep it going, and maybe serve an important population that we're called to serve, that can help make your case.
Absolutely. Okay, we got another really great question about someone will be applying as an associated nonprofit foundation. So how do they identify their relationship with the church? Bob, do you want to take that?
Well, we have had many cases where a closely related nonprofit has worked with a congregation and has actually done the application. Allison, I know there's a place for that in the LOI and application process. Can you say a word about that?
Sure. If you are a nonprofit, there'll be a section to say that that's what you are. We'll have you upload your memorandum of understanding or other type of agreement with the actively worshiping congregation that you're partnering with. And again, a paragraph about the nature of your relationship and who the contact people are. So there's definitely room for that in the letter of intent and the full application for us to get a handle on what the exact nature of the partnership is.
Great. So we have another question about if one's leadership covers multiple church sites, can multiple letters of intent be submitted? Allison?
So this is, the short answer is yes, but there must be an individual application for each site. I'm thinking of one other instance in which we've had this happen with the Spanish missions, that each individual site had to apply. Bob, Gianfranco, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you're right. So it has to be an individual, things. It's not just one entity for like 5 different sites, so it has to be individual, even if they are maybe, part of a larger, situation.
I just want to reiterate, because I'm seeing this question pop up, and again, we do not cover AV equipment. That's not something that's an eligible cost for our program.
Mm-hmm. We have another question from a congregation that had a planned capital campaign in 2019 that was unfortunately halted due to COVID. So would their planning, they're considering an LOI, would an evaluation of their parish be acceptable?
Just one word about capital campaign and COVID. I'm sorry that you decide to stop. We have seen it so many times this past year. They actually, all the congregation are involved in a capital campaign. We're able to really be successful. Remind everybody there is more cash in people's pocket right now, believe it or not. The market is also doing very well, extremely well, which means the people that are in a position to make gifts, they have the right financial situation. So that's very important to keep them, for this, also this grant. We haven't seen any trouble really because COVID.
Absolutely. Would residents attached to a church qualify? Allison?
I'll let Bob handle this one.
Right?
Well, my take on that would be, if it's still a residence, no. If it's the old rectory that's now historic and it's adjacent to the main sanctuary and it's used for an outreach program, then that might qualify. But if it's a normal rectory where the rector or the manse where a clergy person still lives, probably not.
It's a stretch. It's a big stretch.
And I'll just add as a correction to my statement in the chat that buildings must be actively used for worship. I think, again, the idea is that they're used for community use.
Yes.
We received a question about how many LOIs are invited to apply out of the total number of LOIs submitted. My understanding is that it is around 40. Am I correct in that, Allison?
Mm-hmm. Between 30 and 40.
Between 30 and 40, and we admit around 16 to 18. So for there's been a number of questions about whether or not we are recording this. Yes, we are, and it will be on our National Fund website, and we will also email this webinar out to all of the attendees in case you missed anything or have any additional questions that we couldn't get to at the end of our Q&A today. So, okay. And
one thing, Chris, if I may,
Absolutely.
Thank you. We are a very open funder, so there is always a very open line of communication with us. So keep that in mind, so don't think that we are unreachable, on the contrary. So, we are, yeah.
And Franco, well said. And I might simply add, I am delightfully surprised that we have so many great questions. This webinar, I think, is so important and useful. So we really want to thank you for all your questions. And I don't think we've been able to answer them all. So we'll save the chat and we'll figure out a way to make sure that all the answers that you would need are available to you somehow. So we'll figure out how we provide that to you. I think we've addressed maybe 80% of them, but certainly not all of them. So we'll make sure you have those answers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if you have a question that we were not able to answer in this public forum, please do reach out individually on our emails that are available, of course, and we'll do the best we can to answer it directly.
Absolutely. To echo what Bob said, we are all super approachable. If you have any questions regarding your eligibility or how to use Found-In or anything like that, you can always reach out to me and I'd be more than happy to assist you. But a lot of our questions, unfortunately, we won't be able to get to today. But as Bob said, we will save all this and write an email answering all the questions so that your question will be answered. Expect the answers along with the webinar in about a week from now. So we will send out a follow-up in about a week. But thank you everyone for coming. A couple last things. My email, Allison email, and the grants email are here for you if you have any questions or you want to bounce some ideas off of me. I'd be more than happy to help. So keep in mind that the deadline is March 15th Pacific time. It's coming up soon. So we can't wait to read all your letters of intent. I'm really looking forward to helping out in whatever capacity we can. So thank you so much for coming today, everyone. Any last comments or statements?
Great conversation. I thought that was terrific.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Again, please keep an eye out for all of the answers to your questions, as well as this webinar in about a week. So we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks very much.
Bye, everyone.